I want you to picture the room. Round tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces that cost more than my first car, chandeliers doing what chandeliers are built to do, making everything below them look important. 400 people in their finest, moving through a ballroom in a hotel that had been booked for this evening 18 months in advance. A gala. The kind my wife had been organizing for 3 years. The kind that had become, in certain circles in this city, the event of the season. Black tie, live orchestra, a program printed on cardstock thick enough to feel like a statement. And me, the man who had written every check that made it possible, sitting at a table near the kitchen doors. Not a punishment table. Let me be clear about that, because I want you to understand this precisely. My wife had not put me there out of cruelty. She had put me there out of something I find, looking back, even harder to sit with than cruelty. She had put me there because it simply did not occur to her to put me anywhere else. I was wearing the same tuxedo I had worn to her cousin's wedding 4 years earlier. It still fit. I had pressed it myself that afternoon in the bedroom while she was at the venue doing final walkthroughs with the event coordinator. She had left the house at noon. She had not asked if I needed anything. She had not told me what time to arrive. She had texted me the address of the hotel, a hotel I had personally contacted 14 months prior to negotiate the venue rate, and told me the doors opened at 7. I arrived at 7:15. A young woman at the check-in table found my name on the list. She walked me to my seat, table 14. I sat down. I looked around. To my left, a man who turned out to be the venue's head of facilities. To my right, a woman who coordinated volunteers for the organization. Across from me, 2 members of the catering staff who had been given seats during the program portion of the evening as a courtesy. Nice people, every one of them. I want to be clear about that too. I had a perfectly pleasant conversation with the facilities manager about the building's original architecture. He was knowledgeable and warm and had spent 11 years in that hotel and loved it visibly. I am glad I sat with him. But I also knew what the table meant. And I knew that the woman who had placed me there, the woman in the silver gown moving through the room near the stage, greeting donors and board members and city officials with the particular ease of someone completely in her element, she had looked at the seating chart for this evening and placed her husband at the help table without a second thought. I ate my salad. I waited, because I knew what was coming. And I had decided, sometime before that evening, that when it came, I was not going to manage it. I was not going to soften it or redirect it or arrive early to warn anyone. I was simply going to sit at table 14 and let the evening be exactly what it was going to be. The program started at 8:30. By 9 o'clock, the room knew something that my wife did not yet understand she had forgotten to account for. This is that story. Part 2. The background. My name is Darius. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. My grandmother raised me from the age of 9 after my mother moved to Houston for work that kept extending itself year after year until the distance became the arrangement. My grandmother was not a bitter woman about this. She was a practical one. She took me in the way she did everything, without ceremony, without complaint, with the full force of a woman who had decided that whatever was in front of her was going to be handled. She ran a small alteration shop out of the front room of her house for 31 years. Hemming, tailoring, wedding dresses, prom gowns. The careful, precise work of making things fit people who could not find anything off the rack that worked for them. She charged fair prices, and she was meticulous, and her customers drove from 3 neighborhoods over because they trusted her hands. I watched her work every day after school. I watched her talk to people, really talk to them, the way people talk when they feel like the person across from them is actually present. I watched her build something modest and lasting out of nothing but skill and reliability and the consistent refusal to cut corners on anything that mattered. That is my entire business education right there. Everything I know about building something real, I learned watching my grandmother hem a wedding dress at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening with the same care she had given the first dress she ever hemmed. I was not a flashy student. I was a persistent one. I went to a state school in Tennessee on a combination of grants and loans and a small scholarship the alteration shop had somehow helped fund. My grandmother had set aside a fixed amount every month since I was 9, in a savings account she did not tell me about until the week before I left for college. She handed me a deposit slip with a number on it and said, "This is for school, nothing else." I majored in finance. I did not love finance the way some people love what they study, but I was good at it the way I was good at most things, through patience and attention and the willingness to stay with something longer than most people are willing to stay. I graduated. I took a job at a financial services firm in Atlanta. I worked there for 7 years. I learned what I needed to learn, and then I left and started my own firm with 2 partners and a client list we had built slowly and carefully over years. The firm grew, not explosively, steadily, the way things grow when they are built correctly. By the time I was 38, I was managing more capital than I had imagined when I was sitting in my grandmother's front room watching her unpick a seam with a tool that cost $4. I met Claudine at 34. She was 32. She was working as the director of a nonprofit focused on arts education for underserved youth in the city. A real organization doing real work, not the kind that exists primarily to host galas, but the kind that goes into schools and after-school programs and puts instruments in children's hands and pays teaching artists fair wages. I respected it from the moment I heard her describe it. She was magnetic. There is no other word. She walked into a room, and the room reorganized itself around her. Not because she demanded attention, because she gave it so generously that people naturally moved toward her to receive more of it. She was funny and quick, and she cared about things with her whole body. I fell for her the way men fall for women who are fully, unself-consciously themselves. We dated for 2 years. We married. We bought a house in a neighborhood we both loved. She continued leading the nonprofit. I continued building the firm. 2 separate worlds with a shared life between them. For the first few years, those 2 worlds coexisted without much friction. She had her work, I had mine. We came home to each other, and the home was good, real, warm in the ways that matter. But slowly, and I want to be honest about how slowly, because I do not want to compress years into a simple explanation, something shifted in the way she saw me in relation to her world. Not in her love for me. I do not want to be misunderstood. She loved me. I believe that. But there is a particular thing that can happen when one person's work becomes publicly visible and celebrated, and the other person's work stays private and unannounced. A quiet recalibration of value. A gradual, unconscious, never-stated reordering of who matters and who facilitates. I had become, in the world of her work, invisible. Not all at once, gradually. The way a room gets cold when the heat goes off. You do not notice the exact moment. You just notice, at some point, that you are cold. Before I tell you about the 3 moments I want to share with you, I need you to understand something. Claudine did not intend any of what I am about to describe. I believe that completely. I am not telling you this story about a woman who set out to diminish her husband. I am telling you about something more common, and in some ways more painful than that. About the particular way a person can become invisible to someone who loves them, when that someone has stopped looking with full eyes. The first moment happened at a board dinner 2 years into the gala tradition. The nonprofit had grown significantly. The gala had become the primary fundraising event. The board was expanding, new members being brought in with corporate connections and philanthropic track records. Claudine had organized a dinner for the incoming board members, a restaurant, private room, 12 people. I attended as her husband. Over the course of the evening, the conversation turned to the gala and its funding. A new board member, a corporate attorney named Philip, polished and precise, asked about the major donors. He wanted to understand the financial architecture of the organization. Who were the anchor contributors? What relationships needed to be cultivated? Claudine talked about 3 donors by name. She talked about their histories with the organization, their giving levels, their personal connections to the mission. She spoke about them with the specific warmth of someone describing people who had made her work possible. I was not one of the 3 names. Now, I want to be careful here. I had specifically asked Claudine to keep my giving anonymous. That was my choice. I had reasons for it that were genuine. I did not want my contributions to change the dynamic between us professionally, or to create any appearance of conflict given that I was her husband. I had been clear about that preference, and she had respected it. But sitting in that room, listening to her talk about her major donors with that warmth, something quietly noted that while she was honoring the preference I had expressed, she had also stopped seeing the weight of what was behind it. She had stopped, in the day-to-day reality of running a demanding organization, connecting the anonymous giving to the person sitting next to her at dinner. She had stopped seeing me as the donor. She had just started seeing me as the husband. Those are different things, and the difference matters. I said nothing. I had a perfectly good evening. I came home and took off my jacket and helped Claudine carry the leftovers she had brought home into the kitchen and went to bed. The second moment happened at a planning meeting I attended by accident. Claudine had been in intense gala preparation mode for 2 months. One Saturday morning, I was home when her co-director and 2 board members arrived for a working session at our kitchen table. I had not been told. Not angrily, just genuinely not mentioned. I came downstairs in a t-shirt looking for coffee and found a meeting happening in my kitchen. I was introduced as Claudine's husband. Friendly nods. I poured my coffee. I was about to take it back upstairs when one of the board members, a woman named Sandra, who I had met several times before, said something about the venue contract. She said the hotel was being difficult about the rate. She said it was going to affect the budget significantly. I knew exactly what the situation was. I had spoken directly with the hotel's events director 8 months prior. I had called in a relationship that I had built over years of routing corporate events through their property. I had personally secured a rate that was 30% below their standard event pricing. Claudine did not know the details of how that rate had been obtained. She knew the number. She did not know the conversation behind it. I stood at the kitchen counter with my coffee. I said quietly, "The rate is locked. You don't need to worry about it. It was negotiated last spring." Sandra looked at Claudine. Claudine looked at me. There was a brief pause. Then she said, "Darius helped with some of the logistics." "Helped with some of the logistics." I nodded. I took my coffee upstairs. I want you to sit with that phrase. Helped with some of the logistics. I am not telling you it was meant as a diminishment. I am telling you what it landed like. Like a man who had spent hours negotiating a contract that saved the organization significant money was being described as someone who had helped with some of the logistics. The way you describe someone who had carried boxes or set up chairs. I sat in my home office and I drank my coffee and I looked out the window at the street. I thought about my grandmother, about the hours she spent on other people's clothing, about the care she brought to every seam, about the way she worked and never asked for recognition, and never received enough of it, and never stopped working anyway. I thought about what she would say if I described this moment to her. I knew exactly what she would say. She would say, "Baby, the work knows your name even when people don't. Keep going." The third moment, the worst one. 3 weeks before the gala, Claudine was at the dining table working on the seating chart. This is a task she took seriously. The specific architecture of who sits where and near whom. The social engineering of a room full of donors and board members and civic figures. She had been at it for 2 evenings. I sat across from her reading. I could see the chart from where I was. I watched her move names around with a pencil, the head table, the donor circle, the board placement. At some point she looked up. She said, almost absently, the way you say things when your real attention is on the work and the words are just maintenance. She said, "I'm going to put you near the back. That okay? I need the front tables for the board and the major donors, and I want the mid tables for the corporate sponsors." Near the back. I looked at her over my book. I said, "Wherever you need me." She nodded and looked back down at the chart. I looked back at my book. I read the same paragraph 3 times. Then I closed the book. I sat there for a moment, and then I made a decision. Not an angry one, a clear one. I was not going to say a word. I was going to sit wherever she put me. I was going to let the evening be exactly what it was going to be. And when the moment came, and I knew the moment was coming because I knew what the program contained, I was going to stay exactly where I was, at whatever table she had assigned me, and let the room do what it was going to do. Done arguing for my place at the table, done making myself visible to someone who should have been able to see me without my help, I was going to let the work speak. One final time. In a room full of 400 people. I went to the gala. I sat at table 14, and I waited. In the weeks between that evening at the dining table and the night of the gala, I did something I had never done before in our marriage. I went completely quiet about the organization. Not coldly, not as a punishment. I simply removed myself from the daily texture of gala preparation that I had, without announcement, been embedded in for years. The vendor calls, the budget reviews, the quiet problem-solving I did from my office when something needed to be handled. The check that arrived when the catering deposit came up short. The phone call I made to the hotel's events director to confirm the setup specifications. All of it. I stepped back from all of it. I told no one. I did not explain to Claudine. She did not notice immediately. She was deep in the operational current of the final weeks of preparation, and there was simply too much moving to observe what had stopped. I spent those weeks doing what I had been doing for years, running the firm, honoring my commitments, being present in my marriage in the ways that had nothing to do with the organization. I cooked. I was home for dinner. I asked about her days and listened to the answers. I was her husband. I was fully her husband. None of what I was thinking about changed that. But privately, I was making a decision about something I had been considering for a long time. I had been giving to Claudine's organization anonymously for 4 years. The total, by the time of that gala, was significant. Not all through the anonymous channel. Some had gone through normal spousal support, the kind that just looks like a household where the finances are shared. But the dedicated philanthropic giving, the contributions that went through a donor-advised fund with a name that was not mine, that total represented a meaningful percentage of everything the organization had built. The gala itself, the venue, the catering, the production, the printed program on thick cardstock, the centerpieces, the orchestra, I had underwritten the majority of it. Not because Claudine had asked, because I believed in the work, because I had watched her build something real, and I had wanted to make sure the resources were there to let it be as real as it could be. She did not know. Not the full picture. Not the number. Her board did not know. Her co-director did not know. The only other person who knew was my attorney, who managed the fund structure, and my accountant. That was the complete list. I had been holding this quietly for 4 years because I had genuinely not wanted it to change anything. I had not wanted Claudine to feel indebted. I had not wanted the giving to become a thing between us, a card I held, a weight she carried. But sitting at that dining table, watching her pencil me into the back of the room she did not know I had paid for, I understood something. The silence had not protected our equality, it had enabled my invisibility. And invisibility, held long enough, stops being humility and starts being erasure. I was not going to erase myself anymore. The program for the evening included, as it always did, a recognition of the gala's major funders. The organization's executive director, a man named Roland who had joined 2 years prior, handled the program with practiced ease. He was good at the room, warm, precise, able to shift between gratitude and inspiration without losing either. I had spoken to Roland once in the month before the gala, a brief, specific conversation. He had asked, as he always did in the lead-up to the event, whether I had any preferences about my recognition this year. I told him I did. He listened. He said he understood completely. He said he would handle it. I trusted him. And I sat down at table 14 in a hotel I had helped book, and ate a salad, and waited for the program to begin. The program started at 8:30. Roland took the stage first. He welcomed the room with the ease of a man who understood that 400 people in formal wear still needed to be held. That a room full of important people is still just a room full of people who need someone to tell them where they are and why it matters. He talked about the year, the students served, the schools reached, the teaching artists employed. He put numbers on the work in a way that made the numbers feel like people, which is the only way numbers matter. He talked about growth, about what the organization had been able to do in the last 4 years specifically. He talked about the gala as the engine of that growth, the event that had allowed them to dream at a scale they had not been able to dream before. Then he said, "Which brings me to something I want to address directly tonight." The room settled, the particular attention of a crowd that senses something real is coming. He said, "Every event like this one has a public face and a private architecture. You see the room, you see the program, you see the work being celebrated. What you do not always see is the framework underneath it, the giving that makes the room possible before anyone walks through the door." He paused. He said, "For the past 4 years, this organization has had a lead benefactor whose contributions have underwritten the majority of our flagship fundraising event, including this evening. This person gave not for recognition, not for a table placement or a name on a program. They gave because they believed in the work, and they wanted the work to have what it needed to be as large as it deserved to be." I was looking at my water glass. He said, Tonight, at their request, we are changing that. Tonight, for the first time, we are recognizing this donor publicly, and I want to ask them to stand. He said my name, Darius. The room did not react immediately. That half-second of collective processing before a crowd understands what it has just heard. And then it did. It moved through the room the way a current moves through water, not all at once, but connected. People at the front tables turning, people near the stage leaning, 400 people looking for the source of a name that had just been given a shape. I stood up, from table 14, near the kitchen doors, in the tuxedo I had pressed myself that afternoon. I want to tell you what I saw when I stood. Not the room, although the room was something. I want to tell you what I saw at the head table. Claudine, she was at the head table because she was the founder, the founding executive director, the reason the room existed. She belonged at that table. I want to be clear about that. Her place there was earned and right. She was looking at me. Not the way you look at something surprising, the way you look at something that is rearranging your understanding of the last 4 years in real time. Her face was doing something I had never seen it do, something that was not a single emotion but many at once, moving across her features the way weather moves, too fast and too complicated to name each element separately. I did not look away from her. Roland was saying something about the contribution total, about what 4 years of lead funding had made possible. The number, when he said it, produced an audible response from the room. Not gasps exactly, something more controlled than that. The sound a room makes when it recalibrates. Someone at a front table started clapping. The room followed. The kind of sustained, standing applause that builds because the room has decided unanimously that it is warranted. I stood at table 14, and I received it. Not with performance, not with a speech or a gesture or a smile designed for the room. I simply stood, upright, present, the way my grandmother stood when she had finished a difficult alteration and held it up to the light to check the seam, quietly, without theater, with the particular dignity of someone who knows the quality of their own work. Roland said, "We have asked Mr. Darius to say a few words." I had not prepared remarks. I had told Roland that specifically. I said, "I do not want remarks. I want 30 seconds. He had smiled and said, 30 seconds. I walked to the microphone from table 14. The room was still standing. I waited for them to sit. They sat. I said, "I gave because the work deserved to exist at the size it was trying to be. That is the only reason. I would do it again." I looked at Claudine. I said, "The people who build the visible things need people who believe in them before anyone else does. I am grateful I was able to be that for this organization." I walked back to table 14. The room applauded again. I picked up my water glass and I took a sip, and I set it back down and I looked at the stage where my wife was sitting at the head table, with her hands folded in front of her, and her eyes on me. She was not crying, but she was close. And from across that room I could see something in her face that I had not seen in a long time. She was seeing me, fully, all of me. The man she had loved, and somewhere along the way had stopped looking at carefully enough. Later, after the program, after the dancing had started and the room had broken into its social current, she came to table 14. She sat down in the empty chair beside me. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Darius, I put you at this table." I said, "I know." She said, "I put you at the table by the kitchen." I said, "I know." She said, "I didn't." I said, "I know you didn't." She looked at her hands. She looked at the room. She looked at me. She said, "How long?" I said, 4 years. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I didn't want it to change anything." She said, "It changes everything." I said, "It doesn't have to." She looked at me. I looked at her. Between us, the full weight of 4 years of quiet, of money given in silence and work done without announcement, and a man made invisible in the room he had built. I reached across and put my hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held mine. The orchestra was playing. 400 people were moving around us. And we sat at table 14, the two of us, in the middle of all of it. What she said to her co-director the next morning, what that conversation looked like and where it led, That is a story for another day. I have thought a lot about why I stayed silent for as long as I did. The honest answer has two parts. The first part is the one I told Claudine at that table. I did not want it to change anything. I had seen in the lives of other couples I knew what happened when money became a ledger between two people, when giving became a transaction, when one person's contribution was named and therefore weighted, and therefore a thing that could be called upon in an argument or used to establish a hierarchy. I did not want that. Our marriage was not a transaction. It was not supposed to be. So I stayed quiet. I let the giving be what it was, genuine, unconditional, without expectation of recognition. The second part is harder to say. The second part is that I had been taught, very early and very deeply, to make myself small in the presence of other people's visibility. My grandmother taught me most of what I know about dignity and work. But she also taught me, not intentionally, not in words, but through example, that the people who do the behind-the-scenes work do not make noise about it. They simply do it. They show up. They handle things. They make it possible for the visible people to be visible, and they do not ask for anything in return. That is a form of grace, genuine grace. I am not criticizing it, but taken too far, it becomes erasure, and I had taken it too far. I had made myself so invisible, so consistently, so thoroughly, that the woman who loved me had stopped being able to see me even when I was in the room. I had participated in my own disappearance. That is the thing I have had to sit with. Not what Claudine did, what I allowed. You probably know this feeling. You have given something, time, money, effort, care, belief, to someone or something that mattered to you. You gave it without announcement, without expectation, from the genuine, unglamorous place inside you where real giving comes from. And over time, the absence of acknowledgement became the absence of visibility, and the absence of visibility became the absence of belonging. And you stayed quiet about it because you had been taught that quiet was the same as grace. It is not always the same thing. Grace is giving without expectation of return. That part is real. That part is worth protecting. But grace does not require you to disappear. Grace does not require you to sit at the table by the kitchen door and say nothing. Grace does not require you to press your own tuxedo and arrive alone and eat your salad and wait for the world to notice you without any help. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to take up your full space. You are allowed to stand at the microphone in your own room and say 30 seconds worth of the truth about what you have been doing quietly for 4 years. That is not the absence of grace. That is grace completing itself. Claudine and I are still married. I want you to know that. The gala was not the end of our story. It was a door opening inside it. A hard door, the kind that takes effort to push through, with a different quality of light on the other side. We talked for a long time that week. Real talking. The kind where you say the things you have been carrying around the edges of for years and finally put them in the center where both of you can see them. She heard me. Fully. In the way that she always had the capacity to hear people. Fully, completely, with her whole attention. But it stopped directing at me. She is directing it at me again. And I am no longer helping her not see me. My grandmother passed 3 years ago. I keep her photograph on my desk at the firm. On the days when I need to remember what the work is for, not the money, not the title, not any room's opinion of me, I look at that photograph. A woman with a seam ripper and a sewing machine and 31 years of other people's clothing and not one day of complaint about the size of what she had been given to work with. She built what she could build with what she had. So did I. And the room, when it finally saw what had been built, quietly, in the back, near the kitchen door, stood up. That was enough. If this story felt familiar, if you have been doing the invisible work and wondering whether anyone is keeping track, subscribe. I will be here next week with another story. The quiet people deserve to hear their own lives reflected back to them. You are not invisible to everyone. Someone is watching. Someone always is. Keep going.